The Unwritten Page, a chilling audiobook horror story. The fire was not yet roaring, but a patient, growing heart of flame in the small stone pit. It was the only source of light in the small, hidden clearing deep within the alderwood, a place known only to them. The ancient trees, their branches like skeletal fingers, formed a tight canopy overhead, blotting out the stars and the sliver of a new moon. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the first tantalizing hints of burning pine. Around the fire sat 5 figures, their faces painted in flickering shades of orange and deep shadow by the nascent light. They called themselves the Dusk Gatherers, and this was their ritual. The silence was broken by a girl named Elara. She leaned forward, the firelight catching the serious, almost solemn, look in her dark eyes. She pulled a small, leather-bound book from the pocket of her oversized sweater. It was old, the leather cracked and stained, with no title on its cover. It was held shut by a simple, tarnished silver clasp. "I found this," she began, her voice a low murmur that seemed to be swallowed by the surrounding darkness, tucked behind a loose brick in the basement of the old Blackwell School. "It wasn't there last week. I'm sure of it. It was just, waiting." She ran a finger over the clasp but did not open it. "The story I'm going to tell you tonight is called The Tale of the Unwritten Page. It's not about a ghost that haunts a place. It's about a story that haunts a person. And it's not finished until it has an ending. Your ending." She opened the clasp. The pages were not paper, but a strange, velvety vellum, and they were utterly blank. This story is about a boy named Leo. Leo was the new kid in the sleepy, strangler fig of a town called Raven's Hollow. He was an artist, always with a sketchbook under his arm, seeing the world in lines and shadows where others just saw sidewalks and storefronts. He found the old school by accident, on one of his long, aimless walks meant to chase away the boredom. Blackwell School had been closed for 20 years, since a fire in the science wing had tragically claimed the life of a promising young literature teacher, Miss Anya Blackwood. The official report said it was faulty wiring, but the town whispers spoke of something else, something about a story she was writing that nobody ever found. The school was a monument to decay, its red brick stained black with time and soot, its windows boarded up like blinded eyes. To Leo, it was beautiful. He started sneaking in through a broken window around the back, using the empty, echoing classrooms as his private studio. He'd sketch the peeling paint, the graffiti-scarred desks, the way the afternoon light cut through the dust motes in the derelict gymnasium. It was peaceful. Until the day he found the book. It was sitting on the desk in what must have been the teacher's lounge, centered perfectly on a dust-covered table as if it had been placed there moments before. It was a small, leather-bound journal with a silver clasp. Intrigued, Leo opened it. The pages were blank. He assumed it was just another piece of forgotten detritus and, on a whim, slipped it into his bag. A blank book was better than nothing. That night, in his bedroom, he decided to test the paper. He uncapped his favorite fineliner pen and drew a simple, quick sketch of the school's facade. The ink flowed onto the velvety page smoothly, perfectly. Satisfied, he closed the book and went to sleep. He was awakened hours later by a sound. A soft, rhythmic scratching. Like a pen moving feverishly across paper. It was coming from his desk. His heart hammered against his ribs. The room was dark, but a sliver of streetlight cut across his desk. The book was there. And it was open. As he watched, frozen in his bed, he saw the pages begin to turn, slowly, one by one, as if by an unseen hand. He fumbled for his lamp, the light flooding the room. The book was closed. It was just as he'd left it. He told himself it was a dream, a product of an overactive imagination fueled by too much caffeine and solitude. The next morning, the book was open. He was sure he'd closed it. On the page where he had drawn the school, something new had been added. In the upper window of the science wing, the wing that had burned down, a faint, ghostly figure of a woman now stood, looking out. The drawing was in a style identical to his own, but he had no memory of drawing it. The ink was the same shade of black. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. This was the first sign. He showed the book to his only friend, a pragmatic, clever girl named Maya who worked at the local coffee shop. She examined it under a light, even smelled the pages. Weird, she conceded, but probably just you sleep drawing. You've been obsessed with that place. But Leo knew. He hadn't drawn it. That afternoon, he went back to the school, book in hand, a strange compulsion driving him. He went straight to the teacher's lounge. The room was colder than the rest of the building, a deep, penetrating chill. He placed the book on the same table. "Is this what you want?" he whispered to the empty room. The air seemed to thicken. From the corner of his eye, he saw a movement, a swift shadow darting past the doorway. He heard it then, the faintest sound, a woman's voice, humming a tuneless, melancholy melody. He snatched the book and ran, the humming seeming to follow him down the hallways until he burst out into the daylight. The second sign was more direct. He was sketching in his room again, this time a portrait of Maya from memory. He'd captured her laughing, her head thrown back. He closed the book, vowing not to open it again. But an hour later, he felt a powerful, irresistible pull to look. He opened it. The drawing was there, but it was changed. Maya's face was now contorted in a silent scream. Behind her, emerging from the shadows he'd drawn, was the same spectral woman from the school window, her hands reaching for Maya's throat. The detail was exquisite and horrifying. And Leo knew, with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that this was a warning. A promise. He raced to the coffee shop. Maya was in the back, stocking cups. She laughed when he showed her, putting it down to his artistic melodrama. But as she turned to grab a bag of beans, the large commercial coffee grinder next to her, which had been perfectly unplugged and inactive, suddenly roared to life with a deafening, grinding shriek. The switch was flipped on. The cord was still dangling, unplugged. Maya jumped back with a yelp as the machine shuddered and smoked before dying again. The air smelled of burnt coffee and ozone. They both stared at the unplugged power cord snaking on the floor. The color drained from Maya's face. This was no longer a joke. They began to research. Miss Anya Blackwood was a beloved but eccentric teacher. She was a brilliant writer, they learned, who believed stories were alive. She was working on her masterpiece, a novel she claimed was writing itself, a story so powerful it could bend reality to its will. She told a friend she was close to finishing it, but that the ending required a great sacrifice. The fire started in her classroom the next night. Her body was found, but the manuscript was never recovered. Leo understood. The blank book wasn't a journal. It was the manuscript. And it was writing itself again, using him as its pen. It was hungry for an ending. A great sacrifice. The terrifying events escalated. Wherever Leo went, the world would subtly warp to reflect the book's dark narrative. He'd draw a crowded street, and later find the page altered to show the same street deserted and burning, with the spectral figure of Anya Blackwood walking down the center line. He'd hear the humming, now louder, more impatient. Shadows would deepen and twist into human shapes when he held the book. One night, he woke up to find his own hands stained not with ink, but with what looked and smelled like ancient, dried ash. The climax came on the anniversary of the fire. A storm raged over Raven's Hollow. The power went out. In the darkness of his home, with only a single candle for light, Leo opened the book. The pages were no longer blank. They were filled with intricate, horrifying drawings, a graphic novel of terror depicting his own life, his walks to school, his conversations with Maya, his sleeping form. On the final page, the story reached its crescendo. It showed him, standing in the burned-out shell of the science wing at Blackwell School, the ghost of Anya Blackwood standing before him, her form made of shifting ash and embers. In the drawing, he was handing her the book. The final panel was a close-up of his face, his eyes wide with terror, as her burning hand reached not for the book, but for his throat. The caption beneath, in a spidery script he recognized as his own, read, "The End." He knew what he had to do. The story demanded its setting. It demanded its sacrifice. He called Maya, his voice shaking. "I have to finish it. At the school. Or it will never stop. It will just keep coming for us, for everyone I draw." She argued, pleaded, but he was resolute. He took the book and ran into the storm. The Blackwell School was a nightmare of shifting shadows in the lightning flashes. The wind howled through broken windows like a chorus of the damned. He pushed his way inside, the air thick with the smell of wet charcoal and old death. He went to the science wing, to the epicenter of the fire. The hallway was a blackened scar, the classrooms hollowed out and open to the storm. He stood in the center of the worst room, the rain whipping in through the collapsed roof. He held the book in his trembling hands. "I'm here," he screamed into the roaring wind. "I have it. Take it." The air grew still and silent, the storm muffled as if someone had closed a door. The temperature plummeted. From the corner of the room, the darkness coalesced, pulling itself together into the form of the woman from the drawings. Miss Anya Blackwood. She was not a rotting corpse, but a figure of pure narrative energy, shimmering ash, glowing embers for eyes, a whisper of charred paper swirling around her. She didn't speak, but Leo heard the words in his mind, a symphony of rustling pages and desperate longing. Asterisk, the story must be finished. Every story needs an ending, asterisk. This is the ending. Leo yelled, holding out the book. "You take it. It's yours." She glided toward him, a thing of terrible beauty and immense sorrow. She reached out a hand that smoldered with a cold heat. But she did not take the book. Her burning eyes looked from the book to Leo, and he understood the horrible truth. The book was just the vessel. He was the story. He was the ending. The sacrifice wasn't the book, it was the author. She needed his life, his essence, to give her masterpiece its final, permanent form. Her hand moved past the book, reaching for his face. He could feel the heat, not of fire, but of a profound and endless emptiness. He was paralyzed, trapped in the final panel of his own horrific graphic novel. "Leo." Maya's voice. She stood in the doorway, drenched and terrified, holding a flashlight. The beam of light cut through the oppressive gloom, striking the spectral form of Anya Blackwood. The entity shrieked, a sound of tearing parchment and rage. The distraction was all Leo needed. He didn't think. He acted. He threw the book, not at the ghost, but into the center of the room where the rain pooled on the scorched floor. The reaction was instantaneous. The ghost of Anya Blackwood wailed, a sound of utter despair, and dissolved into a whirlwind of ash, rushing toward the book. The pages fluttered madly, the ink seeming to boil and run as the water hit it. The velvety pages absorbed the rainwater, swelling, distorting. The silver clasp glowed red-hot for a second, then cracked. For a moment, the entire room was filled with a blinding white light and the sound of a million voices whispering at once. Then, silence. The book was gone. Only a damp, ashy smear remained on the floor. The storm outside seemed to have passed. Leo and Maya clung to each other, shaking, surrounded by the quiet, broken remains of the school. Elara closed the blank book on her lap. The fire before her had burned down to glowing embers, casting the clearing into deep, dancing shadows. The Dusk Gatherers sat in stunned silence, the image of the burning teacher and the living story seared into their minds. Leo and Maya moved away from Raven's Hollow a month later, Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. He never drew again. He said he was afraid of the lines, afraid they would start to form a picture he didn't intend. He said the worst part was the silence. He said sometimes, in the absolute quiet, he can still hear it. Not a hum. Not a whisper. But the sound of a page, quietly turning. She held up the leather-bound book. "This was in my locker this morning. It wasn't there when I left last night. It was just, there." She ran her finger over the silver clasp. It was warm. "And look," she whispered. She opened the book. The first page was no longer blank. A single, expertly drawn line had appeared, the beginning of a sketch. It was the unmistakable curve of the stone fire pit they were all sitting around. And from the deep, impenetrable darkness of the alderwood, beyond the dying glow of their embers, came the soft, almost imperceptible sound of a pen, scratching eagerly across paper.